Lily sat at the kitchen table, her fingers tapping nervously on the surface. The evening had settled into a quiet calm, but inside her, everything felt uneasy. Her mother, Sarah, was humming softly as she prepared dinner, lost in her own world. It was a scene Lily had seen countless times before, but tonight there was something different in the air, something that made her stomach twist in knots. She glanced over at her stepfather, Mark, who sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He seemed completely at ease, as if nothing was wrong. But for Lily, everything was wrong. She had been feeling it for a while now, this growing sense of discomfort whenever Mark was around. He wasn't like the father she saw on TV or in her friends' lives. There was a coldness to him, a hidden side that she couldn't quite explain. It made her uneasy, and that unease had been building over time. "Mom," Lily spoke up quietly, her voice a little shaky as she broke the silence. "I need to talk to you about something." Sarah didn't look up from the stove. What's on your mind, sweetie?" Lily took a deep breath, her thoughts racing. She had tried to ignore the feeling for months now, but it was growing harder to push aside. Mark's strange behavior, the way he watched her sometimes, the way he'd make comments that left her feeling uncomfortable, it was becoming too much to ignore. "Mom, it's about Mark," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The moment she spoke his name, Sarah's attention shifted. She looked up from the stove, her brow furrowing. "What about Mark?" she asked, sounding mildly concerned but not overly alarmed. Lily hesitated for a moment, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. She wasn't sure how to say what she was thinking. She didn't want to upset her mother, but she couldn't keep the weight of her feelings inside any longer. She had to try to explain. I don't feel right around him," Lily began, her voice faltering. "He says things sometimes, does things that make me feel uncomfortable. I don't think he's a good person, Mom." There was a long pause. Sarah's expression softened, but only slightly. She took a step closer, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder in a gesture of reassurance. "Lily, honey, I know it's been hard for you to adjust to living with Mark, but you have to understand. He's trying. He's a good man. Maybe you just need to give it some time." Lily's heart sank. She knew her mother was only trying to comfort her, but she also knew Sarah wasn't hearing her. She wasn't listening, really listening. She was too caught up in her own world with Mark to see what Lily was going through. "I'm not making this up, Mom," Lily said, her voice growing more insistent. "I'm not just being dramatic. I really feel like something's wrong. He watches me when I'm alone, and he says things that make me feel scared." Sarah's face softened again, but this time it was with a look of concern that bordered on frustration. "Lily, sweetie, I think you're just imagining things. Mark's always been kind to you. You're going through a lot of changes, and sometimes our minds can make things seem worse than they are." Lily shook her head, her breath catching in her throat. "I wish I were imagining it, Mom. I really do." But Sarah just sighed, giving her daughter a sad smile. "I know it's hard. Just try to be patient with him, okay? He's your stepfather now. He's part of this family." Lily stared at her mother for a long moment, her heart heavy with frustration. She had tried, she really had, but it felt like nothing she said would change anything. She was trapped between what she knew and what she wished she could prove. As the evening continued, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. But for now, all she could do was watch and wait, hoping that one day her mother would finally see what she had already started to fear. But that night, everything would change. The next few days passed by in a blur of unease. Lily tried her best to act normal, but it was hard. Every time she walked into a room and saw Mark there, her stomach would tighten. She couldn't explain it, but the feeling never went away. It was like she was walking on eggshells, always aware of his presence. He wasn't overtly mean or harsh, but there was something about the way he spoke to her, the way his eyes lingered just a second too long, that made her feel uncomfortable. At school, Lily found herself distracted. She couldn't concentrate on her homework, couldn't focus on the conversations with her friends. They would talk about their parents, their lives, and Lily would smile and nod. But inside, she felt a growing distance from everyone. How could she explain what was happening at home? How could she put into words the feeling that was gnawing at her every day? Lily knew her friends would never understand. They had no idea what it was like to live in a house where every little thing felt wrong. They didn't have to worry about the way their stepfather looked at them or the way he treated their mother. But Lily did, and every day it was getting harder to stay quiet. That evening after dinner, Lily found herself once again sitting alone in her room. The door cracked open just enough to hear the faint voices from downstairs. Mark and her mother were in the living room, talking about something, probably about work or something else that seemed so normal. But to Lily, it felt like a facade, a mask that covered up everything that wasn't right. As she sat there, staring out the window, she couldn't help but feel more and more isolated. She was alone in this. Her mother didn't believe her, and no one else seemed to understand. She wanted to scream, to tell someone everything, but who could she turn to? Her friends. They wouldn't take her seriously. And her mother. The one person who should have been there for her had already dismissed her concerns. Lily's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Mark's voice, loud and cheerful as usual. He was always trying to be the fun stepfather, joking around, playing games, pretending like everything was perfect. But Lily could see through it. She saw the little things that weren't quite right. The way he would insist on spending time with her alone. The way he always found an excuse to touch her shoulder or brush past her when there was plenty of room to avoid it. Little things, but they added up. She wanted to talk to her mother again, to tell her that she couldn't keep ignoring it. But every time she tried, she was met with the same response. Sarah would brush it off, saying that Lily was just imagining things, or that she was being overly sensitive. Sometimes, it felt like Lily was the problem. Like she was the one making things complicated, the one being unreasonable. But deep down, she knew she wasn't. She wasn't making anything up. Her instincts were telling her that something was wrong, that her mother was blind to what was happening right under her nose. It was like Mark was playing a game, one that Lily didn't understand but couldn't avoid. And every day, she felt herself sinking deeper into that game, unsure how to escape. One night, as Lily was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, she heard her mother's laughter from downstairs. It wasn't the kind of laughter that made Lily feel warm inside. It wasn't genuine. It felt forced, like Sarah was pretending everything was fine when she knew it wasn't. She closed her eyes and sighed, trying to shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her. There was only one thing left for Lily to do. She had to prove it. She had to find a way to show her mother that Mark wasn't the man he appeared to be. But she wasn't sure how. And she wasn't sure how much longer she could wait before it all came crashing down. The tension between Lily and her mother had been growing for weeks, but tonight, it was unbearable. She could feel the weight of the secret pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. She had tried everything, speaking up, warning her mother, but each time, Sarah had turned away, dismissing her concerns. Tonight, however, Lily felt like she couldn't keep quiet any longer. It was as if something inside her had snapped, urging her to finally make her mother see the truth. Lily sat at the dinner table, staring at her half-eaten plate of food. Mark was sitting across from her, his usual pleasant smile on his face. He didn't look at her the way he usually did tonight. Instead, he seemed overly chipper, trying to keep the conversation light and normal. Lily couldn't bring herself to participate in the small talk. Her thoughts were too consumed by what she had seen, by what she knew. Her heart pounded as she glanced at her mother, who was focused on Mark, laughing at something he had said. Her mom's smile seemed too wide, too forced, and Lily couldn't understand how she didn't see what was happening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lily spoke. "Mom, I really need to talk to you," she said, her voice low but firm. Sarah turned toward her, a flicker of concern in her eyes. "What is it, sweetheart?" Lily's heart raced, and she could feel the knot tightening in her stomach. She could feel the words trembling on the tip of her tongue. She had been rehearsing this moment in her head for so long, but now that it was finally here, she didn't know how to say what she had to say. "Mom, I can't keep pretending everything is okay. Mark is not who you think he is." Sarah frowned, her gaze sharpening as she looked between her daughter and husband. Mark's face hardened too, though he tried to cover it with a smile. "Lily, what are you talking about?" Sarah asked, her tone tinged with disbelief. "Mom, I'm serious." Lily nearly shouted, unable to hold back her frustration. "I know you love him, but I've seen the way he looks at me, the way he talks to me when you're not around. It's not normal. And you're just letting him get away with it." Her words hung in the air, thick with tension. Sarah was silent for a moment, her brow furrowed as she tried to process what her daughter had said. Mark sat up straighter, his hand tightening around his fork. "You've got it all wrong, Lily." Mark finally spoke up, his voice calm, almost too calm. "I don't know where this is coming from, but it's all in your head. I've been nothing but kind to you, and I'm just trying to be a good stepdad." Lily felt a wave of anger surge within her, but she fought to keep her voice steady. "You don't get it, Mark. You make me uncomfortable, and I don't think you even realize it." "Mom, I'm telling you the truth." But Sarah didn't seem convinced. She gave Lily a sympathetic look, almost like she was speaking to a child who didn't understand. "Lily, sweetie, I think you're just overreacting. Mark's trying to be a good father to you. You have to give him a chance." Lily could feel the hot sting of tears behind her eyes, but she blinked them away. How could her mother not see it? How could she not see what was happening right in front of her? Every time Lily tried to explain, she was brushed aside as if her feelings didn't matter. "Why can't you just believe me, Mom?" Lily whispered, her voice cracking. "You're not seeing what I'm seeing." Sarah's face softened for a moment, but then she sighed and shook her head. "Lily, I don't want to hear any more about this tonight. I've told you before, Mark is a good man. You need to try harder to get along with him." Mark's eyes gleamed with something dark, but Lily couldn't tell if it was a trick of the light. He let out a small chuckle, as if the whole conversation was amusing to him. Lily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She wanted to scream, to tell her mother how wrong she was, but she couldn't find the strength. Instead, Lily stood up from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm going to my room," she muttered, her heart sinking as she left the room. She couldn't stay there any longer. Every word Sarah said made her feel smaller, like her worries didn't matter. As Lily made her way down the hallway toward her room, she felt a wave of hopelessness wash over her. She had tried to tell her mom the truth. She had tried to get her to see the real Mark, but it was clear that Sarah wasn't ready to hear it. Lily shut her bedroom door softly behind her, her back leaning against it as she slid to the floor. The house felt colder than ever. She was all alone in this. Lily sat in her room, her mind racing with a mix of confusion and dread. The argument with her mother kept replaying in her head, each word echoing louder than the last. She had tried so hard to make Sarah see the truth, but it felt like no one was listening to her. She had hoped, for once, that her mother would understand, but instead, Lily was left feeling even more alone. The house was eerily quiet now. Mark had gone out for the evening, and Sarah was in her room, likely still upset by the earlier conversation. Lily felt a pang of guilt for making things so difficult, but deep down, she knew she had no choice. She couldn't keep quiet anymore. She tried to distract herself by reading a book, but the words blurred before her eyes. Every time she tried to focus, her thoughts drifted back to Mark and the strange, unsettling feeling that had followed her for months. She tried to tell herself that it was just her imagination, but the more she thought about it, the more certain she became that something wasn't right. It was late, and the house was almost still, but Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. She felt trapped in a world where no one seemed to believe her. The walls of her room felt like they were closing in. Then she heard it, a strange sound coming from downstairs. It was subtle, almost like a soft thud, followed by the creak of a door. Lily's heart skipped a beat. Was it Mark coming back early? She glanced nervously at her bedroom door, but it remained closed. The house seemed to hold its breath, and Lily could feel every muscle in her body tense. She stood up quietly, trying to move as soundlessly as possible. Her footsteps were muffled against the carpet, but her heart was beating so loud she was sure anyone could hear it. She crept to her door, pressing her ear to the wood, trying to catch any sound from downstairs. The house was quiet again, almost too quiet. Lily hesitated for a moment. What if it was nothing? What if she was just being paranoid? But she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling at the back of her mind. Something had changed. Something felt off. She opened her door just enough to peek out, making sure the hallway was empty. Everything seemed normal, but Lily still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house felt different tonight, darker, as though it was hiding something. She carefully made her way down the hallway, her footsteps light but determined. As she reached the stairs, she could see the faint glow of light coming from the living room below. It was too faint to be the television, but it was enough to draw her attention. She slowly started descending the stairs, trying not to make a sound. Halfway down, she froze. She could hear voices, low voices, almost whispers. She crept closer, trying to get a better look. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she stayed hidden in the shadows, her breath caught in her throat. From the corner of the living room, she could see Mark standing near the window, his back to her. But it wasn't just him. A strange figure was standing next to him, someone she didn't recognize. The figure was tall and thin, their features hard to make out in the dim light. They were talking, but Lily couldn't hear what they were saying. She strained her ears, her pulse quickening. The conversation was too quiet for her to understand, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Mark's posture was tense, his face a mix of anger and frustration, while the other person seemed calm, almost too calm. Lily's mind raced. Who was this person? What was going on? Why was Mark acting so different tonight? Before she could process any of it, Mark suddenly turned toward the window, his face lit by the dim light. For a split second, their eyes met. Lily's heart stopped in her chest. He didn't seem surprised, almost like he had known she was there all along. He gave her a small, knowing smile, one that sent chills down her spine. Lily backed away quickly, retreating up the stairs as quietly as possible. Her mind was spinning with questions, but no answers. She ran back to her room and slammed the door shut, her heart still racing in her chest. What had she just seen? Who was that person? And why was Mark acting so strangely? The fear that had been building in her chest for so long was now overwhelming. She had to know the truth. But now, more than ever, she was sure that her mother would never believe her. It felt like she was fighting a battle on her own, trapped in a house with secrets no one would see. Lily collapsed onto her bed, her mind still whirling. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. Something was coming, and it was going to change everything. Lily lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling as the weight of what she had witnessed pressed heavily on her chest. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear, unable to make sense of what she had just seen downstairs. Mark's strange behavior, the mysterious figure in the living room, and that unsettling smile. Everything felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. But one thing was clear. She couldn't ignore it anymore. She had to find out what was going on, no matter the cost. The silence in the house was deafening, only interrupted by the occasional creak of the floorboards from upstairs. Lily's thoughts raced, and she couldn't seem to calm the anxiety building inside her. She had tried to tell her mother before, but Sarah hadn't believed her. Would she believe her now, after everything she had seen? Lily wasn't sure, but she had no choice. She couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a house full of secrets. The next morning, Lily decided to be more direct. She couldn't wait any longer. She needed answers, and the only way to get them was to confront Mark and her mother. As she sat at the kitchen table, eating her breakfast in silence, she glanced up to find Sarah moving around the kitchen, humming softly to herself. Lily's heart sank. Her mother seemed so unaware, so oblivious to what was happening right under her nose. "Mom," Lily said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to talk to you." Sarah paused for a moment, turning to face her. "What's going on, sweetheart? You're looking a little pale this morning." Lily took a deep breath, gathering the courage to speak. "It's about Mark. I don't know what's going on with him, but something's wrong. Last night, I saw him with someone in the living room. Someone I've never seen before." Sarah frowned, her expression shifting into one of confusion. "What do you mean, someone you've never seen before? You're just overthinking things, Lily. Maybe it was just a friend of Mark's." "No, Mom," Lily insisted, her voice growing more desperate. "I know what I saw. This person was strange, and Mark acted different. He was talking to them like they were involved in something secret." Sarah shook her head, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "Lily, I know you've been having a hard time adjusting to having Mark around, but you need to trust me. He's a good man. You're just imagining things, honey." Lily's heart sank. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. It felt like every time she tried to explain, her mother just pushed her aside, convinced that Mark was harmless. But Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She had to find a way to make her mother believe her, before it was too late. Feeling defeated, Lily stood up and walked away from the table. She couldn't sit there any longer, unable to convince her mother of the truth. Mark had to be hiding something, and Lily knew she couldn't rely on her mother to uncover it. Later that day, as Mark left the house to run errands, Lily decided to take matters into her own hands. She waited until Sarah was out of the room, then quietly slipped down the hallway to Mark's office. The door was ajar, and Lily's heart raced as she slowly pushed it open, her breath shallow. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she had to start somewhere. She had to find something that would prove Mark wasn't who he claimed to be. As she scanned the room, her eyes landed on a small drawer in Mark's desk. It was locked. That alone was enough to send a wave of suspicion through Lily's chest. She tried the drawer handle, but it wouldn't budge. She glanced around quickly, making sure no one was coming, then spotted a paperclip on the desk. Her hands were shaking as she straightened it out, using it to carefully pick the lock. It only took a few seconds, but it felt like hours. The drawer creaked open, and Lily felt her pulse quicken. Inside there were a few papers, but one stood out, a document with strange markings on it, something she couldn't quite understand. It wasn't anything that looked like a normal piece of paperwork. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it out, scanning the unfamiliar words. It looked like some sort of code, or maybe a language she didn't recognize. Before she could examine it further, she heard footsteps approaching. Panic flooded her chest. Lily quickly shoved the paper back into the drawer and closed it, trying to make everything look normal again. She barely had time to catch her breath before Sarah called out from downstairs. "Lily, what are you doing in there?" Lily's heart skipped a beat, and she rushed out of the office, closing the door behind her. She tried to sound casual as she called back, "Just looking for something, Mom." As she hurried back to her room, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of discovering something huge. But the more she uncovered, the more dangerous it felt. And with her mother still refusing to list, the next few days felt like a blur for Lily. She couldn't stop thinking about the document she had found in Mark's desk. The strange symbols had stuck with her, haunting her thoughts. Every time she tried to focus on something else, her mind would drift back to that drawer and the paper she had almost understood. She was certain it was important, something that could prove her fears about Mark were real. But what was it? And what if it was something dangerous? Lily spent the next few days avoiding Mark as much as possible. She tried to stay out of his way, pretending everything was normal, though it was becoming harder to keep up the act. She felt like she was walking through the house on tiptoes, constantly looking over her shoulder, half expecting to see him lurking around every corner. He was always around, always watching her, even when he wasn't saying anything. It was starting to drive her mad. She hadn't told her mother about the document yet. Sarah still wouldn't believe her, and Lily wasn't sure she could handle another argument where she was dismissed. But she couldn't stay quiet forever. The truth was clawing at her, demanding to be known. One afternoon, while Sarah was out running errands, Lily decided she had to take another look at the document. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She needed answers, and the only way to get them was to dig deeper. She snuck down the hallway to Mark's office, her heart pounding with anticipation. She had to be quick. She couldn't risk getting caught. As she opened the door, the familiar scent of his cologne and the faint sound of the clock ticking on the wall filled the room. The drawer was still locked, but this time, Lily had come prepared. She had taken the time to search for a proper key the night before, finding one hidden in Mark's coat pocket while he was away. Lily slid the key into the lock, her breath catching in her throat. The drawer clicked open with a soft sound, and Lily pulled it out carefully, her hands shaking. She rummaged through the contents once more, her heart racing as she reached for the piece of paper. The symbols were still there, just as she had remembered, and they made her pulse quicken. There was something important about them, something she had to understand. Her fingers brushed over the paper, and this time, Lily took a closer look at the markings. She tried to make sense of them, but it was like trying to read a foreign language. The symbols weren't just random scribbles. They seemed deliberate, with each mark connecting to the next, forming an intricate pattern that gave Lily chills. What was Mark hiding? She grabbed her phone and tried to take a photo of the document, her hands trembling as she focused the camera. But just as she clicked the button, a noise from downstairs froze her in place. It was the sound of a door closing. Lily's heart stopped. Mark was back. Panic surged through her as she quickly stuffed the document back into the drawer and closed it. She barely had time to pull away from the desk and stand up before the sound of footsteps reached her ears. They were slow and deliberate, the unmistakable sound of Mark moving through the hallway toward the office. Without thinking, Lily darted toward the door, making her way to the stairs as quickly as she could. She prayed he hadn't heard her, that she could make it back to her room before he noticed she had been in his office. Her breath was shallow, her pulse pounding in her ears as she hurried up the stairs. Lily reached her room just as Mark rounded the corner, and she shut the door behind her with a soft click. She stood there for a moment, her back pressed against the door, her body still trembling from the close call. Her mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. She had to be careful. She couldn't risk being caught again. As she sat down on her bed, Lily's thoughts kept returning to the document. There was something about it that she couldn't ignore. She had to figure it out, no matter how difficult it was. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. But who could she turn to? Her mother wouldn't believe her. Her friends were far away, and even if she told them, they wouldn't understand. It felt like Lily was trapped in a web of secrets, with no way out. Every step she took toward the truth only seemed to make the situation more dangerous. She had to find a way to get answers before it was too late, before Mark's secrets reached a point where there was no turning back. For now, all Lily could do was wait, watch, and hope that somehow she could find the strength to face whatever was coming next. The truth was out there, and she knew she was getting closer to uncovering it. But with every step, she felt herself slipping deeper into a world of uncertainty. The days seemed to drag on as Lily continued to watch and wait, her mind consumed with the mystery surrounding Mark. She hadn't told anyone about what she had discovered yet, and it felt like the walls were closing in around her. Every little sound in the house sent her into a frenzy, every creak of the floorboards making her heart race. She couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was just on the horizon, and she had no idea how to stop it. It had been a week since Lily had snuck into Mark's office, and though she had tried her best to avoid him, it was becoming harder to keep up the pretense. Mark had become more persistent, always around, always watching her, his smile never reaching his eyes. He acted like everything was fine, but Lily knew better. She knew that beneath that smile was something far darker, something that only she seemed to recognize. One afternoon, Lily couldn't take it anymore. She had to confront her mother again, even though she feared the outcome. Her heart ached with the weight of knowing that Sarah was still blind to the truth. She couldn't just sit back and watch as Mark continued to manipulate everything. As Sarah was busy in the kitchen, Lily walked into the living room and stood still, gathering the courage to speak. She wasn't sure if she was ready for another failed attempt, but she couldn't live in fear any longer. "Mom," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Sarah turned from the stove, a concerned look on her face. "What is it, Lily? You look upset. What's wrong?" Lily took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "I need to talk to you again about Mark." Sarah's face immediately tightened, and she turned back to the stove. "Lily, we've already been through this. I've told you, he's a good man. He's trying. I know it's hard, but you have to understand." Lily felt the sting of frustration creeping up her throat. How could her mother still be so blind? How could she not see the same things Lily saw? It was like they were living in two separate worlds. "No, Mom, you don't understand," Lily said, her voice rising with desperation. "He's hiding something. I know it. I've seen him with people. Strange people. He's not who you think he is." Sarah didn't turn around, her voice soft but firm. "Lily, you're imagining things. Mark's been nothing but kind to you, and I know he's trying his best." Lily shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm not imagining things, Mom. You have to believe me. I've seen him with someone, and it's not just anyone. It's like they're involved in something secret, something bad." Sarah's expression faltered, but just for a second. She sighed, as though weighed down by the same argument they had gone through countless times before. "Lily, you're not thinking clearly. Maybe it's just the stress of living with a new family. Things aren't always going to be easy. I can't just forget it, Mom." Lily cried, her voice cracking. "I can't pretend that everything is okay when it's not. You don't see him the way I do. You don't see how strange he acts sometimes. Please, just listen to me." For a long moment, there was silence. Sarah stood still, her back turned toward Lily, her shoulders slightly slumped. It was as if the weight of the conversation was too much for her to bear. Finally, she turned around, her face tired, almost resigned. "I know you're upset, Lily, but I don't want to keep having this conversation. I love you, and I know you're going through a lot, but Mark is here to stay. I need you to try harder to get along with him." The words hit Lily like a punch in the gut. How could her mother be so dismissive? How could she keep choosing Mark over her own daughter? Lily opened her mouth to protest, but before she could say anything more, there was a knock at the door. Both of them turned toward the sound, and Sarah went to answer it, leaving Lily standing there, feeling like her world was falling apart. Lily wanted to scream, to demand that her mother listen to her, but she knew it wouldn't make a difference. Sarah was already too far gone, already too committed to her belief that Mark was good. And Lily felt powerless, trapped in a house with no way out. Her only hope now was to gather more evidence, something that would prove to her mother that Mark wasn't the man he appeared to be. But how? How could she gather the truth without risking everything? Lily's heart raced as she realized that the next step was even more dangerous than anything she had done before. She needed to be careful, to move quietly, but she couldn't let fear stop her from uncovering the truth. The clock was ticking, and the more she waited, the more she feared that something would happen that she wouldn't be able to undo. But what could she do? What would be enough to make her mother believe her before it was too late? The days felt like an endless cycle for Lily. She had tried everything, yet she still couldn't get her mother to believe her. Each failed conversation with Sarah left Lily feeling more isolated and frustrated. The house felt colder, more suffocating, and every interaction with Mark made her stomach twist in fear. She could no longer pretend that everything was okay. Something was terribly wrong, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. But the question that haunted her every night was whether it would be too late by then. She had been waiting for an opportunity, some moment when she could finally prove to her mother that Mark wasn't who he appeared to be. And that moment came sooner than Lily expected. It was late one evening when Lily was alone in her room, the soft hum of the house the only sound she could hear. Sarah had gone to bed, and Mark had left the house earlier that evening, something about a business trip. Lily's heart raced as she heard the familiar sound of Mark's car pulling into the driveway. He had come back earlier than expected. Lily's instincts kicked in. There was something about the way Mark had acted that night, something that felt different. He was hiding something. She knew it. She couldn't let him slip past her again. The fear in her chest gave way to determination. She had to act fast. Her mind raced with options, but the only one that made sense was to confront him. She had to know what he was up to. She had to see it for herself. Without thinking twice, Lily crept out of her room and moved quietly down the stairs. She stayed in the shadows, careful not to make a sound as she reached the living room. Mark had just entered through the back door. He hadn't seen her. Lily watched him from the hallway, her breath shallow. He was talking to someone on the phone, speaking in hushed tones, his voice low but urgent. She could barely make out the words, but she didn't need to hear everything to know something was wrong. Mark's usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a tension that made Lily's pulse quicken. He was being secretive, and Lily wasn't going to let him get away with it this time. She took a deep breath and moved closer, just a little bit at a time, so she could hear more clearly. Mark's back was to her, and he didn't seem to notice her presence. His voice became clearer, and Lily's heart dropped when she heard one of the words he said. Package. Her mind raced, her thoughts swirling with confusion. What package? What was he talking about? Lily felt a cold chill run down her spine. She had to know more. She waited until Mark finished his conversation and hung up the phone, his back still turned to her. Her chance had come. Lily quickly slipped into the living room, trying to be as quiet as possible. She didn't know how much time she had before Mark realized she was there, but she couldn't let fear stop her now. She needed answers. She needed to see for herself what Mark was hiding. She made her way to the back door, where she had seen him earlier. The door was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open, peering into the dark yard outside. Her eyes scanned the area, and then she saw it, a small, nondescript box sitting next to a pile of wood at the far edge of the yard. It was hidden, almost like it was waiting to be discovered. Lily's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the evidence she had been looking for. She didn't think. She just acted. Lily ran to the box and grabbed it, clutching it tightly in her hands. She hurried back inside, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't explain why, but she knew this box was important. It was the key to everything. She darted back up the stairs, her legs shaking as she made her way to her room. Once inside, she locked the door behind her and placed the box on her desk. She could feel her hands trembling as she opened it, her heart racing with anticipation. Inside there were a few documents, papers that were clearly not ordinary. They were covered in those same strange symbols Lily had seen before. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized the truth. Mark was involved in something far bigger than she had ever imagined. These papers were not just random notes. They were part of something secret, something dangerous. Lily felt a surge of determination. She wasn't going to let this go. She had proof now, something concrete she could show her mother. The next step was clear. She needed to tell Sarah everything. She needed to get her mother to see the truth once and for all. But just as she was about to pick up the phone to call her, she heard a sound outside her room. The faint creak of the floorboards. Someone was coming. Mark had returned. Lily's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly shoved the documents back into the box, hiding it under her bed just as the door to her room opened. Mark stepped inside, his expression unreadable. Lily's pulse raced as he looked at her, his eye